Right then, let's get cracking on our new build. Now, my first step usually is to divide up the instructions, and I find if you do that, it just is a little bit easier to get your eye across them and understand what's going on, and you can divide things up into, that just becomes more clear just by doing that. So that is what I'm going to go and do through the instructions as my first step, and when I've done that, we'll come back and start building. Right, my next task, having marked up the instructions, is to just anneal the Photo-etch, and then that's job done. We don't have to worry about revisiting that during the build. So we'll just take off the sticky back plastic. There we go. As soon as you've changed colour, you know that you're done. Yeah, I think we are there. Yeah, brilliant. So I've just cleaned up these first two parts, and what I can see when I put them together, actually unusually for Miniart parts, there is some location pegs just sticking out. They're only ever so small, and they have little location points rather than big holes. But when I put this together and I look through there, don't know if it'll pick up on camera. There we go. There is a gap. So when you look closely at it, and I've just put my extra strength lenses on, the surface here is not very smooth, and that's holding that apart. So what we're going to do is just very fine sand it flat. Make sure that we've got nothing that's going to hold this open, and then if necessary we'll take away the location pins. So that's the female half. So if we do the male half now, that's a bit trickier without removing the pins, which I don't want to do. Okay, let's try that. It is better, but it's not fully solved the problem. So I'm going to take away the location pins, and I think that should help. Okay, so it is definitely harder to get the parts to line up without the pins. But we have now dealt with the gap, so yeah, that's good. Now the other thing I've spotted is, you can see we have two little holes there. We have the same on this one, but one of them is slightly closed up, and that's where these location rollers go. So we just need to open that up a little bit. So I'm just going to put my reamer in from the back. And then if we go back through the front, that will take any swarf away. There we go, that's that hole put in. Okay, so next task is to clean these little rods up. So before we take the tab off, we're just going to clean the seam up on that side, directly opposite the nub that's been left by the sprue gate. I'll get rid of the seam either side of that. And then we just have to sand that away. That's the first one done. Okay, so I'm going to put these two little supports in first. Then we've got to line them up on the other side. Okay, and then we can glue that in. Right, I'm happy that that is okay. When it's dry, we'll just level that surface. That is step one done. So this time the pins aren't giving me any issues at all. These surfaces are nice and flat as well, so that's really handy. Yeah, so we don't need to remove the pins this time. There's a tiny little location hole for this little rod that goes in there. So what I'm going to do is put a spot of glue on it first. Put the rod on. Put our two halves together. Putting the rod in the other side first, and hopefully that will all clip together nicely. There we go. Got it in. So whilst that is all in, put a spot of glue on the other side and get some in our joints. I'm just going to clip those two halves together, just belt and braces. Doesn't feel like it really needs it, but can't do any harm, can it? There we go. So we'll let that dry for a sec. Right, my glue is dry, so on this first assembly I'm just going to make sure that everything's level and flat. This is a nice firm sanding pad, has very little movement in here at all. And that should give us a nice smooth joint for this part here, which goes in like so. Yeah, that goes on lovely. And then it mates with that, so let's just do the same there. Yeah, all of those surfaces are measured up, so goes on there lovely as well. So that's nice. So what you're looking at there is the underside. Now if we flip it over, all of that gets covered, so I'm not worried about the join because we've got a tank and stuff that goes over the top. But on this side, that gets covered, so I'm not worried about that. This side, I want to just clean this up a little bit, and this one particularly is very deep. So this joint here, very deep. That one not so much, just needs a bit of a sand out there. So we want to sand all the way around there, but we need to fill that, so we'll do that next. Use some Umbro filler, it dries really quite quickly. There we go, that should be more than enough. Don't see the need to do it anywhere else, so we'll just leave it at that and leave that to dry. While that's drying, I can clean up these other parts that are being used in step 3. Okay, so that pops into there. When you look at it, there's a long side and a short side, which you can then see in the hole there. So I am really struggling to get this in, it will not have it, but I've just noticed, and I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but just inside the cylinder opening, there is some lumps in the moulding, and I'm wondering if that's stopping it from going in. So I'm just going to clean that up with a round file, and hopefully that will solve the problem. So I'm actually going to use a half moon diamond file. And it seems to be a little injector pin mark, which I hadn't noticed. So let's try now. Still not having it. And in at the front door. That is such a tight fit, but now we've got it. In fact, such a tight fit that it's actually forcing that open slightly. So, yeah. That still fits and covers the gap, so I'm going to glue that in while we've got it in. But yeah, does feel a little oversized, that part. Okay, we have cleaned up our joints. All looks good. Happy with it. Bearing in mind that's the underneath, and it won't really be seen anyway, but want to make it right. So the next job is to join these two parts together, which we use this little plate for that I thought looked like a radiator. Well, it does look like a radiator. So I'm going to stick it onto this side first. Okay. That should be more than enough actually. And then just make sure that we get it the right way. Oh. There we go. And then that pushes into there. Beautiful fit. So that is our main body held together. Now we have these hubs for the back wheels, and what they've done is they've given them little location pins, and we have 2 on this side and just 1 on that side, so you can't get them mixed up. So I've already cleaned these parts up. Just make sure they're nice and tight in that pin. Okay. And then I have 2 very tiny little parts that we need to just put on this side here. That first one just goes there. And glue that in. And the other one's going to go on that point there. There we go. Oh, nearly put that one upside down. So the little cross member goes at the bottom, not the top. Okay. And that completes our step 3. Step 4 is a little bit more complicated, so let's have a look at that. So we are now on step 4 of our tractor build, and in step 4 we're required to add a nut. So when we looked at the instructions, it shows you that there is a nut to be added onto here. So as you look at the part, you can see it's got some nuts all the way around, but clearly they couldn't mould that one. So what they have done is they have moulded some nuts there, and the idea is you remove it and glue it on. So we're going to do that with a chisel. It's quite a firm piece, so shouldn't give us any issues. There we go. I'm just going to take a knife now and trim it. It is so small. There we go. I'll put my finger on it so I don't lose it. Okay, so there it is. Still needs a bit of a trim. There's a little bit of plastic from where we took it off with a chisel. And with these little tiny things, a good way of handling them is actually with one of these wax pencils that you use for Photo-etch. So I'm going to put a little dab of glue where we want it. There we go. Another glue just to tidy it up. And that is our nut on. Now I'm guessing the other 2 are spares, or it could be we're using them later in the build, I'm not sure. I would imagine, I mean, they usually give you a couple of spares with these things. If you don't end up using them, they're a great thing to put in your spares. So I've just tidied up part CE12. There's a seam that you have to take out from the outside and the inside. And obviously this is our towing point, and we have a pin which is moulded into place. and I'll be honest, when you've tidied it up, it looks just fine. But I personally don't like the position, and I've said this before in other builds, but if you can add some animation, I think you always should do, because it does bring the level of the model up. So for me, that should be slightly off to one side, so it looks like it's been used rather than it being perfectly straight. Now you could, with a little bit of care, cut that off, clean it up and glue it back on in a slightly different position. Quite possible, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the whole thing, which will allow me to get into this part and weather it better anyway, and replace it with a scratch built pin, which I'm going to use this brass rod for. So the first thing I need to do is put a bend in, and then we can trim the rod to size. So I'm using some round nose pliers for that job. So we've got our bend in. There we go. And actually, in terms of length, that's not far off right from the off. So we just have to cut it. And what I'll do is I'll use a pair of sprue cutters. These are old ones that I use for cutting large chunks of sprue up with. We use these just to mark the position, which is the end here. There we go, we can see that. Take the stop out in this instance. Okay, that is our pin done. So I just need to tidy that up a little bit. Using a toolmaker's vise, because when you're working with metal, there is nothing better for helping you get a flat. Because this is hardened tool steel, everything else that you're working with is always softer. There we go, we can go right down, make sure it's nice and flat. And I'm going to do the same for this end as well. And then what we actually want to do is just round the edges off a little bit. So be careful not to squash the part, of course. So that is our pin made. What I want to do is just round the edges off a little bit, and we can simply do that with an emery board. Our next task is to remove the moulded in pin. So simply cut that centre section out. Trim that back end off. and we'll need to clean up the part a little bit. Okay, and then finally we need to drill a hole in that, so I'm going to get my vise. Okay, little tip when you're wanting to put a part in the end of a vise like this, and this plastic is fairly soft and it's easy to crush, and there's a flare on the end of this which is wider than the part that we want to hold in the vise, so I really need to hold it in the vise on the end like so. So to stop the vise closing at one end and either crushing this and deforming it, or this being loose and not holding properly, you want something of the same diameter in the other end. So I'm going to just quickly modify a little bit of sprue so that I can stick it in the other end. And what we need to do is make sure it's the same diameter or width as the part that we're going to put in the vise, and that looks about right now. So we'll put that in. There we go. That's holding that nice and tight, and that is stopping anything getting crushed. So I'm going to start by putting quite a small hole in as a pilot hole, and then we can put a bigger hole in after that. Now I'm just carefully opening up our drilled hole using our little tool here, just so that we can get the right diameter to pass the pin through. These reamers are really good, actually. They are really, really helpful. Okay, so I know I've got the right diameter now for that, so I'll just find a drill of that diameter, and we can just flush it through and make sure that we've got a straight hole, because obviously the reamer wants to put a taper in and we don't want that. So that is our separate pin made now, and I think once you put the pin in, being able to have it at a bit of an angle gives it a nice little look. So yeah, I'm happy with that. That's a nice little amendment. Okay, they're all cleaned up. Let's start some gluing. So our next task is to make these photo-etch parts. So we've just got to roll these corners, so let's crack on with that. So because we've annealed these, in theory, they should roll really quite easily. I'm using a very thin drill bit to do this. So when I look at these parts, they all have to come all the way back on themselves. So let's start with this one, which should be the easiest one, being the largest one. That's one done. I'm just going to use a knife blade to just coax that up. There we go. Bit tricky doing it because the camera's in the way. The camera is exactly where I want my arm and hand. Anyway, we have it done. We've worked through step 5, so there was no issues with the adding of those pieces there, other than that hole needed to be widened ever so slightly. The positioning of the spring, it's a little tricky. What I did is I glued that part in CE11, which glues into that hole there, and then held CE33 into this little location hole here, and then glued that on, and just held it into place, and then put some glue into there, and that sort of then cemented all of that together. This piece here, C42, that immediately broke when I came to start cleaning up the 4 contact points on there from the sprue. Now that's 0.5 millimeter diameter, that plastic rod, and what I've done is replaced it with 0.4 millimeter brass rod. It didn't have 0.5. That looks fine for all intents and purposes. No one's ever going to know. So that's gone on okay. Then let's see, on this step here, 6, I've left off the little filling caps, the 3 on the top, C43 and EB 10 and 11, because they're a different colour to the body, so I'll add them separately once it's painted. That again, the whole assembly there is a little tricky. That's the most positive part, so I glued that in first, and then each individual side, and that last. And you've got to do it straight one after another so that you've still got soft glue and you can move it around. Actually, this tucks in underneath there, and there's a little ridge there that sort of clips in, but you do have to hold it all in place, and I actually found it easier to, once it was glued, to just quickly put it onto the body, as you can see here, and just push it all into place to make sure it was all square and fitting as it should. So yeah, C26, so connection nub is on the top of that, so it was a little tricky to clean up. And it's glued into place, and when its glue is really hard and dry, leave it 24 hours. I'll give that a very gentle sand and try and flatten it a little bit more. That isn't a very positive fit at all. It goes into that little hole, but it's not clear exactly where it orientates itself on the side. So I've put it like that for now. We might have to re-glue that so that we can move it when we put the tread plate on. And then we've got that little item there that looks a bit like a landmine, but I'm sure it's not. So that is gone on, which is that part there. So the other bit is the Photo-etch. So I have placed the Photo-etch on, no real issues with that. There's a slight curve to it, so I didn't anneal this, I just gave it a bit of a bend with my fingers before applying it. That'll all get painted, and then use a polishing stick just to take it back to the brass lettering, and that should look fine. There you go. Perfect for that sort of job. Plate sits on there. We've got a little lining up ridge that goes inside this hole, so I'm just dry fitting it first. That seems to go on okay. And then that is making contact with that, so that's lovely. Not quite going all the way down on this side though. I just need a little bit of encouragement. There we go. That's sitting better. Let's put some glue on that then. So our next task is the seat, which is absolutely lovely. Does have a little bit of sinking. I'll show you in a minute. It's made up of a number of different parts, and we're going to leave it as a sub-assembly, I think. So we've got a spring, we've got the seat back, and then we've got the mount for it. So 4 parts to make up the seat. See here, there's a little bit of sink in the middle. So as soon as we've got this built up, we'll put a bit of Mr. Surfacer in, I think. I'm just going to put a small amount of Mr. Surfacer in the base of this seat here. And we'll see how we get on with that. We'll have to get in with a little bit of sandpaper, a bit of wet and dry, and sand that back, but that should be okay. So we'll leave the assembly of the seat until that's done. But what we can do is glue in the spring, and then the seat can be mounted onto that at a later date. So we just need to check if there's an orientation for the spring, and there is. The little lumps on the side go on either side of it, so not front to back, side to side. There we go. That's looking all right. I was able to clean up the spring quite well, so I didn't see a need for replacing the spring. And we also have this big cover to go on as well. So there is what looks at first impression looks like mould seam, but actually there's a slightly raised lip that goes all the way around the edge, and the contact points for the sprue gates is actually just above them, but sanding them is going to remove that without a shadow of a doubt. So I'm gonna try and remove them using a scraper rather than sanding them. We'll have a go. If we can't, then we'll be sanding the whole lot off, which would be a shame because it's a nice detail to keep if we can. The risk with scraping is that we deform the part slightly, surface. That's not going to work, I don't think. Let's try a knife and see what happens. I think when that comes up on the primer, that will look okay. So I think with a bit of care, we can keep that little lip around the edge. Okay, we can get this cover on now. That little fastener detail, just near my finger there, that points upwards. So, and as we look inside, there's two little things that just fit underneath that flat edge there. So hopefully this should go in okay. There we go, that's a nice tight fit actually. Leave that to dry while we clean up. We've got some form of lever there to clean up, and then we've got the steering rod, which has got quite a bit of flash on it, well, relatively speaking. So before we actually clean up the knobs, I'm going to deal with the flash. Okay, happy with that. No sign of the connection knobs on there, so this mounts just in there like so. There's a little pip that goes in a location hole. It's a bit tricky actually. We could have done with putting it on before that lever. The lever's right in front of where it goes, so we can get it in okay though. So I'm just going to get the joint sticky. Okay, there we go. And we can clean up this other lever then. There we go. See how that connects underneath now. It's a really delicate part. As always with Miniart, the build is delicate, but the result is beautiful. Right, the next cover is two parts. I've just cleaned it up. And then it goes together quite nicely. It's got a little location point at the front. Everything lines up lovely. So we'll shove a bit of glue down there first. Okay, and then we turn that upside down. There's 2 location pins there, which is going to help ensure we get this the right way round. Oh, okay. And then that goes into that square there. So I'm not going to glue that part in because that's going to interfere with painting. So, but you can see it fits really nicely, and we can see how that works. So that's another sub-assembly, which we can leave off for now. Right, the next thing is the mudguards and flaps and bits and pieces that go around the back here. So we've got 3 large pieces. So I'm going to clean them up and then we'll have a look and see if we can build them up for painting or whether they're going to get in the way as well. So our side pieces have gone on. They needed an elastic band just to hold them into place. This side particularly wanted to come away a little bit, but we have it in, and I'm happy with it. And then this third piece, it attaches so nicely. It just goes into the underside here on each side, and then sits on top of these little pieces here, and it all looks so natural and lovely, and it's just really is a piece of art. So yeah, that's done and is looking nice. So I've started building up the front axle. So as we look at the instructions, I've cleaned up that piece. There was quite a bit of seam on there to clean up, and I've cleaned up that and those and put those in. They're very tiny, so and there's a nub on the side there, so needed a little bit of work. So I've done that bit. I'm just about to work on these and those, and then we can have a look at whether we're doing this as a sub-assembly or what. It's quite a complex little. You've got a swing arm here, which allows the wheels to move up and down, and then you've got the steering rod, and it may be that we're attaching the steering rod separately. We'll have a look when we're done, but that's where we're up to. We've also got a Photo-etch strap that we've got to form for the chimney there, so that's coming up in a moment as well. So here's the front axle built up so far, and it really looks the part when you look at the way the fasteners work. It's just beautiful, really is nice. Okay, so got these little hubs next for the wheels, and they're gonna get mounted into these teeth here. So I just need to check my orientation. Yeah, so they go in. They should just pop in like that. So that makes them movable, which is nice. I'm just going to pop it out again, and we will clean up the ends. So it's attached at 2 points, and we just need to tidy those up. Okay, now there is a little bit of seam on there, so I'm going to deal with that as well. They're not the easiest things to hold because they're quite short. Okay, so that's the 2 end pieces on, and you can see that's free running. So my intention is to leave it like that. We'll have to see what the front wheels do in terms of weight and whether that makes it difficult for them to stay on, but I suspect we'll be all right. So next thing is a little towing hook at the front. Okay, so the towing hook it needs quite a bit of cleaning up, and it's a bit difficult to get in. It's doable with my scrapers, but for most people, if you don't have those specialist scrapers, you ain't going to get in. So I want to do what we did last time. So I'm going to replace it with some 0.5 wire. So what we're going to do is just trim the bottom end off first, and then trim the inside out. And then the little top piece comes off. Just be careful, there is a little bit of a flare, and you don't want to take the lip off. So let's clean that up. Okay, so we now need to put a 0.5 hole in there. So let's do that. So it can be difficult to get these things straight. I could use my drill press, but setting it up for this is a bit of a faff, if I'm honest. Okay, I think what we'll do next is glue it on, which will make it easier to handle. Make sure it's straight. Okay, so we need to cut a new bolt. So I'm going to use this 0.5 gauge lead wire. It's just nice and easy to manipulate lead wire. And we won't just straighten some out first. Don't need no wire straightener for this. And first thing I want to do is just see if it passes through the hole, or whether we need to open it up a little bit. So that's our new bolt made, and we'll just put that away. The beauty of lead wire is it is very, very soft. So it's great for running cables around cockpits and that sort of stuff. And I have, this is 0.5, I've also got some 0.2, but there is, I think there's 0.3 and 4, and I think it goes up to as wide as 1mm. So this product's by AS Distribution. I think Scale Model Shop is where I got it from, I seem to recall. I'm going to carefully thread this through, and then with that in place we can just trim the length to how we want it. Just think it adds a little bit of animation to the model, and wherever you can do that you should. Okay. Let me get the next parts off and we'll have a look at those.